So I mentioned in my video on The Righteous Mind that I wanted to do a topic introduction on this book, The Three Languages of Politics by Arnold Kling. So basically his thesis is that liberals tend to talk about politics in terms of oppressor versus oppressed. Libertarians tend to do it in terms of liberty versus tyranny, and conservatives in terms of civilization versus barbarism. And so I come from a culturally left background, and until I moved to Houston, I pretty much exclusively knew some libertarians and then otherwise mostly people who I would identify as liberal or leftist. And I've identified as libertarian or libertarian-ish since I was 16 or 17. And I've certainly noticed when talking with what I would call movement libertarians that the way they argued was frustrating to me and made no sense, because they would start with these abstract first principles about liberty, not really acknowledging how the world worked. Whereas I would tend to be, my position came more from social engineering takes away freedoms we already have. And so it was interesting when I finally read Conflict of Visions by Thomas Sowell, because he made this precise point that people who believe in the constrained vision, which I do, believe that generally social engineering isn't actually providing meaningful new choices, it is taking away meaningful choices. Whereas a lot of movement libertarians, and he mentioned libertarianism is weird because it's not strictly constrained or unconstrained, and some libertarians, some are one way or the other, because I'm a libertarian who is very much constrained, and I've met a lot of unconstrained libertarians who annoy me, but I think he was focused on a lot of libertarian philosophy is sort of a hybrid of the constrained and unconstrained vision. So I knew I don't see things the way other libertarians do, which is why I've often identified as libertarian-ish instead of libertarian. And this explains why, because again, I already sort of noticed, but it's like, oh, it's this first principles of liberty in the abstract without really acknowledging the context that policies come from or the reasons people might have for, because people have, social engineering generally comes from legitimate goals that make sense. It just fails to achieve those goals. And so I tend to say, yeah, I recognize what people are trying to do with social engineering, and I think it's valid. It's not going to work. Whereas libertarians, movement libertarians, tend to say, no, it's just immoral to even try this on the first place. And then with liberals, I was actually insisting I didn't believe that liberals actually operate like this. I was like, yeah, a few terminally online people on the left operate like this, but it's not really mainstream. But what I realized is I was confusing liberal, sort of the liberal establishment versus liberal and leftist political activists. And the liberal establishment is very pragmatic and just sort of does what benefits them without being terribly ideological. But liberal and leftist activists, I've realized, if you look at how they talk, and especially if you look at how they operate, yeah, they're basically operating on the assumption that all conflicts can be divided into oppressor versus oppressed, and you take the side of the oppressed. And a lot of them would deny that's what they were doing. As I said, I was skeptical that's what they're doing, but I realized, no, that actually does represent the reasoning pretty well. And then the civilization barbarism thing. So I've mentioned I'm going to do a video on the connection between the Spanish Republic and Rhodesia. But it's interesting that what we'd consider the conservative side in both those conflicts, the nationalists under Franco and the Rhodesian UDI government under Ian Smith, defended what they were doing in terms of civilization and barbarism, even though both of these entities did a lot of things that I would consider pretty barbaric. However, understanding that this is how the activists, the ideologues in these groups think, is helpful in terms of relating to them. And so I wanted to share this idea quickly. If you're interested in talking with people different than you who are politically ideological, either if you belong to one of these groups or if, like me, you don't really, but you interact with these people and are baffled by their reasoning, I found this helpful, and I'm actually going to want to reread this book sometime soon because I read it like 3 years ago. So anyways, just wanted to share this idea quickly. Thanks for watching. I'm Magpie, this is Leela, and I'll see y'all in the next one.